Things like today we're getting into usability and user experience testing and understanding what it's like to work with traditional users of a website or perhaps like a prototype, which we did in week 7. So we're getting started with that. We're going to get a bit into prototyping a bit more with some tools over the next few weeks. And this week we're focusing on what it's like to test with users for a variety of different things, whether it be a prototype or a website or an app. We're going to use these kind of competencies of user experience design and understanding the usability of what you're making here in this class and hopefully in this minor. So what is usability testing? There are a number of methods of testing the usability of a website or anything, but if we're looking at this the way we have been, framing it in the digital world with this kind of iterative cycle between empathizing with some users, defining, say, a problem or something that kind of needs a solution, brainstorming about how we might be able to tackle that problem in a variety of different ways, and eventually where we are now with kind of starting to prototype something, use those ideas that are informed by users, and now we're at this stage where we're going through testing with users to really vet what our thoughts were on a particular design challenge or navigation issue that we want to kind of figure out. This is typically the phase in this kind of iterative cycle where you're getting to use your media skills and try to understand how users are actually interacting with what you've made. There's a number of different methods and frameworks that I'll kind of go through in this lecture, and you'll get some of that in your readings this week. So let's get started. So a big thing with usability testing, and Krug kind of gets at this in his reading this week, usability testing on 10 cents a day. Usability testing is not a focus group. So if we can think of a focus group as kind of bringing people in to kind of give their opinions, their thoughts, and kind of maybe even kind of reveal some of their biases toward a product or toward a story, usability testing is not that. Focus group is a really useful method for understanding users, but that's not exactly what we're doing in this class, at least. Usability testing is employed to kind of show a user something and then ask that user to figure out what that something is, or to try to use it in doing a typical task that you would with, say, a website like Amazon when you're going shopping and you want to understand how that user finds a particular product that they're looking for, or at an airline how they find the right set of dates, or any of these number of things that are kind of very task oriented. These are the kinds of things that in usability testing we're looking to see potential flaws in our navigational patterns, or at least maybe see some differences in the way that users can kind of navigate through your entire website, or say your transmedia story, or even sort of your video sharing page. What is not necessarily pleasurable for that user, like what do they enjoy? I think that gets a bit more into user experience testing, but more kind of the tasks and the necessary nuts and bolts and key clicks and mouse clicks that users are going to have to incorporate into their workflow of understanding what you're making. Now, typically speaking, usability testing doesn't have to be this large form, kind of huge process in understanding, say, several different users or how they interact. I think that's one thing that focus groups are useful for, gaining insight and feedback kind of very quickly from a number of people. But more or less, testing a website or an app or whatever with 3 to 5 people is really usually the sweet spot for this kind of testing, this kind of task-based testing that will help you spot your most common kind of navigation, visual design, and other issues from those first few people. In his book, Krug talks about the fact that testing one user is 100% better than testing none. However, there does seem to be a bit of a law of diminishing returns. As you test with more users, you typically tend to find very similar issues after that initial 3 to 5 people that you test with. So again, with things like websites or these large kind of transmedia campaigns or any of the wicked problems that we might be trying to solve in design thinking, as with all of these things, with usability testing, testing early really can save time, money, and can save you headaches as a media designer. You're typically trying to find out how your something fails, and you're trying to figure that out early and test that, reiterate things so that you can kind of come up with better prototypes and eventually produce your product. Um, it gets very costly to do this if you've designed an entire website and then decide that you need to have an overhaul based on some testing that you've done. Testing early really helps to save you time and money, and it's a skill that everyone, even writers, researchers, media designers, any of these kind of positions that you might be interested in, it's a really useful thing to have in your toolkit to be able to work with users to kind of point your stakeholders to data that backs up why you've made choices that you've made in the design of the products that you're going to make, or the stories, or the whatever. So this is a kind of a graphic or a laid out page in the Krug text. Hopefully you guys can see it here on YouTube, maybe not, but it's also in that reading. This is a really good way of kind of arranging all of the different steps that you might take with different sketches and prototypes and how to test with them, so that you can understand your users and do it in a kind of concise way and something that doesn't sprawl out of control. You get too much data, can't do anything with it. It's hard to manage. So when you're looking through the reading, kind of pan through this laid out page and look at some of these cells to kind of understand exactly the progression that Krug is getting at when he's talking about testing, and how you can test in different ways and get very specific or very general with what you're looking to find out. But you want to do that in an iterative cycle throughout the lifespan of what you're trying to make, so that over time you are kind of consistently testing with users for the usability of that particular piece of an app or a user interface or a website or a story or a campaign, yada yada yada, etc. So I wanted to give you some real-world examples of usability testing, some user testing, so that you could get a glimpse of it and see it in action. I don't think you're going to be able to click these links on YouTube, but both of these links are going to be up in Canvas. One is a big long list of several kind of task-based usability tests that you could pursue, kind of that are task oriented and apply to a bunch of different contexts, like booking a trip on an airline, getting food delivered from DoorDash, all manner of these kinds of things. I'm also giving you an example of a user testing video. This was conducted by Meineke to just kind of understand how people were interacting with their website. It's short, it's about 5-6 minutes, but both of those are going to be up on Canvas. So check those things out as you're getting into usability and trying to understand it. So what is user experience? User experience and usability kind of go hand in hand, but whereas with usability, we're typically focusing more on the tasks and the attitudes and behaviors of your user when they're kind of completing those tasks. User experience is more thinking about how the user that is using your product, how is their time when they're doing it. It's less about the tasks and more about kind of making that user experience as productive and uncomplicated as possible, so that users can kind of follow their own user journey in a way that feels kind of intuitive. So you're looking at user attitudes and behaviors with user experience. You're trying to measure how a user feels and responds to whatever you're making. And you kind of want to consistently respond to this in the design of your prototypes. So it's important to usability testing how a user goes about completing a task, whereas to user experience, it's so much more important to understand how that user actually kind of feels, what their behavior is kind of while they do something, not necessarily what they're clicking, but are they frustrated? Are they kind of happy? Are they entertained? And these are kind of goals that are kind of looked to in user experience, to understand what your goals are with making a product and kind of testing with people to find out exactly what the purpose of what you're doing is, it may be different than what you assume. So you want to be able to set some usability and user experience goals that you can test with. You're going to find out a lot more about this in 5 Competencies of UX Design this week. You're reading from Somas. I've also got a few slides here just kind of going through those 5 competencies just real quick so that you can get kind of a quick overview of those as well.
All of the 200 level classes in this minor will go into much more depth on these concepts that we'll be talking about this week. Here, though, the goal is just to know what they are and how they relate. So we think about these skills as the 5 competencies of user experience, or UX design. UX design is a term that's new for you in this course, but we've really already talked about it. In those design thinking models where we talked about your vision for what the solution to the problem was, where you came up with a solution that was better and then implemented it, that's user experience design. The solution is typically the user experience design. If we look at Tim Brown's model, UX design usually happens here, somewhere between ideation and implementation. That's usually where user experience is happening in Brown's model. And similarly, as we look at Dubberly's the analysis synthesis bridge model, it's going to happen here, kind of between prototyping and the preferred or explicit result. So as you design and implement digital solutions to problems, the 5 key skills you need to succeed are information architecture, interaction design, prototype engineering, usability engineering, and visual design. All of these things kind of work together and complement one another to kind of produce a lot of the solutions that we find when we're thinking about user experience. So from top to bottom, thinking about information architecture is how you're going to store your data and information for your project, and then subsequently how people that are using that data are going to find it. Beyond that, interaction design is figuring out how people use what you make. What features does it have, and how do people use those features to solve the problem? Beyond that, there's prototype engineering, which we've looked at a little bit, but basically making some sort of example of your solution so you can see how it works and get new ideas in the real world as you attempt to implement it. Beyond prototype engineering, there's also usability engineering, which is testing your prototype, that example that you made, to see if the solution actually solves the problem, what problems it may generate that you didn't think about beforehand, and things like that. And then lastly, visual design. So as we'll see a little bit later in the class, there's this conceptualization that attractive things work better. So if your digital solution looks nice, people still will want to use it. And we're going to be looking at each of these different categories and competencies of user experience design in the next 5 weeks. For this week, you've got kind of a light week with this lecture and one reading, just kind of covering these 5 competencies from SOMAS, which is up on Blackboard right now. And you'll have a response paper due for that this coming Friday, with comments in the discussion due on Sunday.
So again, with usability testing on 10 cents a day by Krug, we want to always make sure that our user testing is task oriented. We want to observe and evaluate how and why users do what they do. A big point of clarification for a lot of people is that the user isn't the one being tested. If you are employing someone to use your service or product and is giving you feedback, it is not something where you should be kind of critiquing the user, or you're only trying to understand and observe their process so that you can take that kind of unfiltered data and put that into a new iteration of your design to test with new users. A huge method for this that's still in vogue today are eye tracking studies. This is something that's done where an apparatus, a camera, is kind of attached to a user while they navigate a website. It's typically used for website usability. But that can actually map where on the website or where in the video or whatever it may be that user's eyes actually move to understand how their navigational patterns work within that website. There are countless eye tracking studies available online. You can just put that into Google and find those. But that's kind of a higher tech specific kind of navigational technique for understanding how users interact. But there are numerous other methods, both of which, or all of which, are in usability testing on 10 cents a day and the 5 competencies of user experience this week in your readings. Everything from more behavior based to more task oriented methods. There are a number of ways to kind of go about this, and there are applications for many different methods, and it really just depends on kind of exactly what you're testing and what you want to find out. So make sure you check out those readings this week. They'll help you out a lot, I promise, when you're getting into your assignment. Okay, so for your assignment this week, I want everyone to write a usability test. We're going to be uploading these to our discussion section in Canvas. I'm not requiring that you guys talk back and forth this week, but you are going to upload it to that Canvas discussion section. And for your assignment with writing this usability test, from our reading this week, I want you to come up with a method for testing either your prototype from week 7, if you feel as though it has enough articulation, or you can kind of understand it well enough that you could put it in front of users and they could actually do tasks and interact with it in some way, whether it be simply understanding the message, or what are typically referred to as get it questions. Krug uses that term. Do they get the kind of purpose? As well as task-based questions where people are required to, users have to move from, say, one place to another in an app or the website or your campaign story, whatever it may be. You may find that you don't necessarily have enough articulation in your prototype to be able to test adequately, and that's why I give you the option to also, you could look at a website of your choice. You can look at tons of usability test examples on YouTube. I'm putting a couple up on Canvas, so you'll be able to see the kinds of questions that people ask if you go seek those resources out. So you should focus on actionable tasks for this usability test regardless of what you're testing. You might find that your prototype isn't articulated enough to use. We'll be getting into some more prototyping and some digital prototyping techniques here in the next couple weeks as well, so your abilities to do that will kind of increase. And ultimately, just think of questions that will force you to observe and understand the user journey from task to task. So we're just writing a usability test this week. You don't have to go do any testing with people. And with that kind of way of thinking about it, it may be more useful to think about your prototype from week 7 in a way that, how could I increase the fidelity of this prototype so that when my users come to it and I'm trying to test with them, I have enough articulation in that prototype to be able to get users to perform tasks and observe and understand those things. Thanks so much for checking out the lecture this week. Assignment will be up in Canvas along with some readings and some videos. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much, y'all.